Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another social emotional workshop. Today, we will be discussing um, grief and loss and the coping skills necessary to deal with that. Thanks again, Joe, for joining us, and Caitlin, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, let me get organized here. Put up here. Okay, very good. I got all my boxes situated. Like Toni said, supporting grief and loss. So this is kind of a shorter presentation than the other ones. I know we kind of lose track of time. We always go like 3, 5 minutes, 8 minutes over. I don't have as many slides in this training here, but I don't want to end too early. So I really would like to know different perspectives and share your experiences when I get to those points. And when I'm talking about anything to add any clarification, add any of your wisdom. I mean, there is a lot of education in this room. So feel free at any time to add to any of the information or slides. So we'll talk about what we're taught as we're growing up, when we lose our first puppy or our dog or something, any losses. So through history, we're taught these myths. So maybe when you were younger and you had a loss, and when I talk about loss, I could talk about loss of a life, of a loved one. We can talk about a divorce or end of a relationship. We can talk of loss of an animal, any grieving of loss. So when we have these losses in our lives, we're told, oh, don't feel bad, it'll be okay. So the person who's grieving is told not to feel bad. We're trying to help them by saying, don't feel bad. So in that person's mind, what is grief in their mind? How do they process it? Oh, feeling this way is bad. So I'm not supposed to feel this way. So I either have to suppress it or something. So we're taught not to feel bad, which is really tough and has conflicting messages in that person's mind. We're taught to replace the loss. So if you lost your first dog that you loved, they're like, well, we can always get another dog. So replacing the loss. A divorce, you can get another husband or wife, right? A relationship, we can replace that. So replacing the loss is supposed to make you feel better. Grieve alone. Now, this one I've experienced in my own life. Like when people are grieving, we leave them alone, right? Don't bother her. She's grieving, so don't go to her, right? She's grieving. Don't bother your mom right now. She's having a hard time. So we're kind of taught to grieve alone, or we're just scared of those feelings and we don't know how to process those feelings. So we kind of isolate and we grieve alone. How about number 4? Just give it time. Time heals all wounds. Have you ever heard of that phrase? Yeah, time. Just give it time. Now, time does relieve some of that grieving process. Having some months and years go by, yes, that could relieve some of that grief and stuff, but there is a recovery from grief that we need to complete. But I know people who've been grieving 10 years, 20 years, losing their husband or wife, and they're still grieving and they still have that pain. So grieving needs to be complete, which I'll talk about through this process. So give it time does have value, but is there a timeline on it? So just give it time, it'll be okay. But what if it's not okay after the timeline is up? Number 5 is another myth. Be strong for others. So if somebody is grieving, you need to be strong for your children. You need to be strong for your mother. So you need to be strong for other people. Like the person who's not crying at the funeral, you're strong. You need to be strong, or that person's being strong for the others. Keep busy. Some people who are grieving are just taught just to don't think about it. Keep your mind occupied. Becoming workaholics. just keeping busy work and not thinking about it. Now that may relieve some of your behaviors or thoughts, those ruminating thoughts and those pain of that grieving, but we'll talk about other healthier ways on how to deal with these losses. Anybody in the room recognize any of those? Been taught many of those?
Well, Joe, I was going to say I personally experienced a lot of anxiety regarding how to comfort someone else, because you don't quite know exactly what to say, because you don't know whether or not what you're saying will trigger um, sad emotions for them, or it just puts you in kind of an awkward spot of knowing what to say to a person, how to comfort a person during a time of grieving loss.
Sure, and it's hard. Nobody knows what to say to a grieving widow. Nobody knows what to say to somebody who lost a child. That's the hardest thing, and we're going to go through those, and I'm going to need a lot of your ideas also when we go through these, but thank you for that. Anybody else like to comment on one?
And then Joe, also the one number 6 about keeping busy. I hear that all the time, that if you keep yourself busy with work and always have something to do, it'll help you get through the process. But you're only busy for so long that what do you do when you're not busy? You're just like sitting there, then it floods your mind again. So I think people using the quote unquote keep busy is not going to ignore the elephant in the room. It's just, you got to deal with it and go through those emotions.
Absolutely.
So, especially when my sister lost her husband to cancer, I think she thought that by keeping busy, it was going to help. But after a year, it kind of all clicked in for her and her kids. So yeah, you got to work through it.
It almost prolongs that grieving period. So if you don't grieve in a healthy way, and if you don't have completion to your grieving, yeah, you can keep busy for 10 years and it's still going to be there when you stop.
Exactly.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Does any of these work for anybody? Have they worked? That's another good question. Okay. But just looking at those myths through history, I mean, a lot of us are taught these things because nobody knows how to handle that loss. You go through this catharsis, you feel bad, and then we're supposed to recover from that and just snap our fingers and, continue our lives. Mark Levinson down here famously said that all change is loss, and a loss must be mourned. So we must mourn that loss, and we must have a completion to that loss. And so others are ill-prepared. We kind of mentioned this, Toni brought this up too. Others are kind of ill-prepared to deal with grief, other people's grief. Their own, of course, but others people's grief. We don't know what to say. They're afraid of the feelings of the other person. A lot they intellectualize. So we're not connected to their loss, or maybe we might be even, but we intellectualize it and to say, well, this happened for a reason, or, you have to kind of keep busy, or any of those myths that we learned. So we don't really emotionally kind of feel that person. We're trying to intellectualize it to make it make sense. They don't hear us. So we don't see that person's grief. We don't see what they're going through or feel what they're going through. They don't want to talk about the death. Now, sometimes we don't want to bring it up, but sometimes bringing that up might be really relieving to that person. So all of these do's and don'ts, we'll talk about what's the do's and don'ts as we go along, but a lot of people don't know how to deal with grief or other people's grief. They want us to keep our faith. Oh, this is a big one. So if you are faith-based and we're angry at God, and they're like, well, you have to keep your faith and this happened for a reason. No, I'm angry at God right now, and maybe I lose my faith over it. Now, people in your life might say you can't lose your faith, and that you losing your faith is a horrible thing. So now I lost my husband, and now I'm a horrible person because now I lost my faith. So it's really convoluted with a lot of things going on. So let's get through these stages of grief here. But these stages of grief, these stages weren't made. The Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she didn't do these for grieving the loss, a death. These stages of grief were made for terminally ill patients that were dying, and that the doctors really didn't connect to these patients that were dying. So they're dying soon, either through cancer or AIDS or any terminal illness that they're dying, and nobody really understood what that patient was going through, what that person was going through. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she came up and wrote this book on death and dying in 1969. And her 5 stages of grief were the ones without the asterisks on there. The denial, avoiding the pain, and saying, why is this isn't happening to me? It can't be happening. Then the anger, now you're just angry that it happened to you. And the bargaining, I'll do anything, just take this cancer away. I will find God. I will, you just start bargaining on what you would sacrifice for this not to be happening to you. And then the depression of despair and hopelessness and sadness. So those were those, and then the last one, the acceptance, was Kubler-Ross's, finding a way forward, right? Future planning. But they've added a couple here, like shock, that numb and freezing thing. So somebody dies and you're just in shock because you can't even think, you can't even deny it. And they added one here towards the end, the testing. So you go through these stages, and now you're testing, you're seeking some realistic solutions, you see some signs of hope, you kind of go back and forth. Now, the terminally ill patients kind of go through this, but they do relate a lot to a loss. So if you lost a parent, this can't be happening, then you get angry and go through those stages. So they do have overlapping connections to a death rather than a person dying. So they do make sense in some way. But the last one here, finding the meaning. This one here, David Kessler, in 2019, he wrote this book about finding the meaning in death. And it's not the meaning in the death on why it happened, it's the meaning as in, let me find my notes here. Finding that their death inspires you in some way, a kind of change in your life because of the death. Finding meaning like a gratitude for the time spent with them. You're finding some meaning in that time after their death. So now let's look at this box and ball. So when somebody is grieving, it's like that center ball. Everybody has this box, and that is the pain button in the middle. So that is the trigger. And in the beginning of grief, that ball is huge and it practically sits on that pain button. But as time goes by and as you're growing and processing your grief, the ball can get smaller and smaller. But that ball is bouncing around and it will hit that pain button every once in a while. And when it does hit the pain button, even if it's small and the pain button doesn't get triggered as often, the same amount of pain, no matter how large or small that ball is going to kind of come out. So you see on the right-hand side, that little ball there is bouncing around, and it could bounce around and hit the pain button. When it does, it's as much pain as that big ball sitting on the button. So these are kind of like triggers. I remember when my mother passed. She's been gone for 15 years now. Can't believe it's been 15 years. And the triggers I used to have, I was a caretaker for my mother. And after she passed, it was pretty hard. So every once in a while, I'm kind of growing, time is passing, and I'm getting a little better. And then I would pass by a handicapped parking spot. And then boom, that pain button just burst out crying in my car. or, seeing somebody in a wheelchair, seeing somebody pushing somebody in a wheelchair. So these little times that these pain buttons get pushed, these triggers, it's as much pain as it was when it happened. But you can look at society as everybody that has this ball in the box. And every once in a while, that pain button is going to get triggered. So when you see somebody that has that trigger or that grief going on, that we need to respond in different ways and understand them. So there's different things that influence our grieving, our personality, right? What kind of personality do you have? Are you an extrovert? Are you an introvert? Are you a strong-willed person? Do you deal with change very easily in your life? So our personalities are really going to affect how we deal with that grief. If you're an A brain or B brain personality, we're going to deal with our grief in different ways. Our culture and our family. So what did you learn growing up? What was your culture? How does your culture deal with death? Is there any things going on? Do you have any ceremonies? What happens in that death? What kind of family values are connected around death? What did you experience about death? Do they protect children from death as they're growing up? So our culture and our family values are all kind of connected on how we're going to grieve, what we're taught. Our previous loss, like how many losses have you had? How did you deal with those losses? What coping skills did you use in those previous losses? So maybe the more loss you have, the more you learn coping skills, and you could kind of understand and get to that connection a little easier. The developmental stage in life. When you had the loss, when you were a child, like how do children deal with loss? I know children around funeral homes, they're running around terrorizing the place, having fun, playing with their toys that they bring and stuff, and they have no connection to that loss. Oh, grandpa's gone and that kind of thing. And so what developmental stage in life are you? So a teenager might take a loss really detrimentally, a loss of a parent. So our developmental stage and ability, even cognitive ability of having that loss at that stage, we're going to grieve differently. And the nature of the loss. Was it sudden? Did you see it? Did you witness the loss? Was it of natural causes? Was it an accident? So all of that is going to contribute to that grief, how much grief, how painful it is, what kind of connections that you have to that. And grief is never experienced the same way for any two people. So if you lost a parent and you're trying to help a friend that lost a parent, that's totally different. They have their own grief. It's almost like depression. Like if I had depression and I've came out of it pretty healthy and got my coping skills, now I'm helping somebody else out with depression. They say, well, this is what I did. Well, you don't know, that was your depression. Their depression is really personal to them. Just like the grieving process, everybody grieves in different ways. There's a lot of different things connected to their grieving process. So let's look at some reactions to this grief. Physical reactions, that is, feeling hollow, feeling weak, lack of energy, crying a lot, maybe shortness of breath. So those are some physical, you can actually feel your broken heart. Some emotional reactions to grief, sadness, anger, guilt, fear, yearning for that person. Behavioral is more of sleeping and eating pattern changes, your restlessness, maybe increase of drugs or alcohol, carrying around objects that were special to that person. Now, all of these are typical. All of these are, there's no right or wrong. It's just, these are some of the reactions that we deal with that emotional pain. Cognitive, this is those memories that preoccupy the brain, the ruminating thoughts. I have 2 widows in my life right now, and they tell me about widow fog, they call it, that they just can't concentrate their mind. They forget things. It's like, what's going on? I just can't focus. And then the spiritual. This is the anger at God, loss of purpose in our lives, loss of meaning, questioning your faith. In these symptoms and these reactions, they last between, 6 months and 2 years is kind of a typical, and they lessen as they go on, like time heals all wounds. But still, there's this book, the Grieving Handbook, that says that you need to complete your grief. So completing your grief is the only thing that's going to kind of heal that pain. You can go through all the symptoms and you can get through it, but now that ball is really small in that box, and only once in a while it'll hit that trigger. So we need to complete our grief, and I'll get a little more detailed as we go along. So now anticipatory grief. So you know it's coming. They've been sick. When I lost my mother, I had that anticipatory grief that I knew it was coming. She's been sick for a long time. We took care of her for 10 years. And no matter if you expect it or not, when it happens, it has the same amount of pain. If you know it's coming, you prepared for it, and it happens, so it doesn't decrease that grief felt after that loss. And the other type of loss is that sudden grief. No time to prepare. And when that sudden grief comes, you feel that uncertainty and that insecurity, that feeling cheated, that you didn't connect all the dots and tell them that you love them or repair any of those unsaid things. So that could be really traumatic and have long lasting effects because it was so sudden. You got all these open boxes that just haven't been processed yet. Now, my father, he died suddenly. So he died on Christmas Day in 1990. And that was a sudden loss. He had a heart condition, but there was no signs that he was going to die that day. We didn't anticipate it at all. So I've experienced both, and both of them are pretty painful. But I'd like to get a little discussion now with some opinions. So what would you rather have the anticipatory, where you can get all of the legal documents all done, you could say your last words, say I'm sorry's and I love yous, and prepare all that? Or sudden grief, where it's just snap of the finger, like ripping off a Band-Aid? What would be easier for anybody if they'd like to share?
Well, okay. I think anticipatory grief, of course, gives you time to prepare. It may or may not lessen the pain you feel, depending upon how you view it in the first place. I took care of my father in his last stages of stage 4 lung cancer. And, I knew it was coming, and it was easier, I guess, or less painful because I did know, and I was given an opportunity to have closure and do some things that would allow me to feel like I had done everything that I was supposed to do. And sudden grief, for me, sudden grief would not be an issue of not having things or opportunity to complete things. Sudden grief would really be for me. I had no idea this was coming. It was unexpected. So I think because I had a friend recently pass a month ago from COVID that I had no idea was going to pass, because the last communication we had was that they were fine or they were recovering, and then they didn't. So that was a sudden loss. Um, it was just the shock of that, though.
Yeah. The anticipatory, keep on getting tongue tied on that word there. That could be really hard to see all the suffering of your loved one, to be there and caretake and see the suffering, see the pain they're going through. And it could be really, really, really discouraging and frustrating. And then, like, my mother took care of her mother, my grandmother. And when they passed, then you have these conflicting emotions going on. And my mother described them to me. So she's the caregiver of her mother, and she took care of her mother for a long time. My grandmother lived in California, came to live in my house. She lived with us for 10 years and then started getting ill. She had black lung. She had a wood burning stove when she was a child, and she got the black lung disease. And so she was bedridden on oxygen for a long time. And my mother, we didn't even know there's resources in the community to have a nurse come in and take care of, cleaning and, washing and things. So my mother did all that for a long time. So when my grandmother died, my mother dealt with the dichotomy of the pain of losing her mother, but the relief that she's gone. So fighting that glad that I don't have to do it, because her whole middle-aged life, my mother was always caretook my father, caretook her mother. And then when they die, it's just so conflicting to deal with those emotions, the loss as well as the relief.
Hey, Joe, I have something a little bit opposite to that. My mom was taking care of her husband. He had Lewy body dementia, and he ended up in a nursing home for the last 10 months. But she went over there every single day, and I found that once he passed, she felt like she no longer had a purpose. Even though she was the caretaker and it was a job and it was exhausting, but it was hard for her, I think, because first of all, she lost her partner. And second of all, she no longer had a purpose. Now she's just got herself. And, it's still hard that way as well.
Yes, absolutely. When my mother passed, I was her caretaker. And I was working full time, and we split breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I did most of it because I had the most time off. And when she passed, I felt the same way that you just shared. It's like my purpose was to take care of my mother. Now I'm just have this loss of, what do I do now? Who am I? And it was just really hard. So I can imagine losing a spouse like you just described, Shirley, that pain would be so much more, that they were connected, and the love of just going there and sharing and supporting and taking care of. Yeah, we do lose that sense of purpose and direction. Thank you guys for sharing. So how can you help in the situation with grieving, whether it's sudden or anticipated? Assure the loved one, just be supportive and just assure them of their grieving and their presence. Just be there, hold their hand. Listen to the one mourning with tenderness, without telling a story about yourself. And unfortunately, when they ask the questions, why this and why I should have done this, sometimes the answer is just, I don't know. Just, honey, I don't know. And just hold them and touch them, and I don't know. There's no answers. We don't have the answers, and we don't need to have the answer for the other person. and then help the mourner adjust just to the practical changes in their life. So now maybe they don't know how to cook or keep the house, or mechanics and electricians and just day-to-day things in our lives. We just have to help them kind of adjust to those changes, that now you have to be mom and dad, or now you have to take care of the yard work that you never pushed a lawnmower in your life, kind of thing. So we just have to deal with these changes in that person's life. Encourage the mourner to turn to others for help and support. If somebody's taught to grieve alone, they won't reach out for help. They won't ask you for help. So we have to let them know that, you have a lot of people around you who love you. You have a lot of people that will help you, to let them know that they're there for support. On that bullet point there, I was told, when people die, we always say, anything you need, let me know. But do those people actually ask? Do they call up? No, they're going to grieve alone. So I was told to, instead of saying anything you need, just do it for them. Now, I was in a grief presentation and they were telling that story. And I thought that was good. Just do it for them. Go shop for them. Do whatever they need. Don't say, hey, do you need this done? Just, I'm going to do this for you. And this one lady shared that this gentleman knew she lost her husband. So he went over there and cut the grass for the lady. When that lady came home, she just lost it, because her husband is the one who cuts the grass. So when she came home, when the grass was cut, she just lost it and just freaked out about that whole situation. So the reason I'm sharing that story is these do's and don'ts, we really don't know exactly what to do. We want to do the best in things, but everybody's a little bit different. So I would just call her up and say, hey, I'm coming over to cut your grass tomorrow, just so they can know that. And if they don't want me to know, that's okay. I have a service or something like that. Realize that everyone grieves in a unique way, and there's no wrong way to grieve. All those things I went through about those personalities and the different emotional and physical ways we grieve, there is no cookie cutter way to grieve. And again, there's no timeline for grieving. So our recovery and expectations. How will I know when I'm done grieving? Well, accepting the loss. And what does that look like, accepting the loss? And we'll kind of get through it a little bit deeper here. Work through and feel the effects of grief. So when we do have all of those, don't consider them as bad, especially from what we learned. Be strong, keep your faith, grieve alone. Don't get any of your grief on others. That's what I hear from my widows too. They say, I don't want to get any of my grief on you. So just stay your distance, because I don't want you to be affected by my grief. So own that grief. You're going through those signs and symptoms of grief. You're dealing with that. Just feel that, own that, know it's typical, and just work through those feelings and emotions. Adjust to living in a world without that person. That's that whole lifestyle change, the processes of your day, of the environment of your home changes. So you're learning to live without that person now. What changes do you have to make in your life? With your finances and your household and your yards and your cars, and just living day-to-day activities without them. And then to continue moving forward with life, not being stuck. Because when we're stuck, we're in this hole and we don't know how to go on, because I don't know how to live that life without that person. So is it grief or is it depression? Because they really do cross and have common symptoms. Like you see some of the symptoms there: a sad mood that won't go away, loss of interest, low energy, changes in sleep patterns. Those could be either grief or depression. We really would like to know the difference between them. So, is it that mental health disorder where we do need to, see a mental health specialist and maybe medication and get some resources to deal with that depression? Or is it just typical grief that I should just do the left side of the screen, that I should just work through these feelings, I should accept the loss, find a new way to continue? So some of the key differences. Grief is more associated with feelings of emptiness and loss versus depression, which is a more persistent depressed mood that makes it hard to feel happy or pleasure. So grief, you're feeling that emptiness, but you have good times, good days sometimes. So if it was depression, it would last continuous. But when you're grieving, it's emptiness and loss. And in grieving, your self-esteem is typically reserved. Whereas in depression, you feel worthless and hate yourself. For sadness related to grief tends to steadily decrease over time. So you're not sad all the time. Time goes by. Sometimes you're happy, and the sadness kind of diminishes a bit. But with depression, feelings of sadness tend to be constant and unwavering. That sadness just continues for weeks and months and years. So with grief, it decreases. You have good days and bad days. So they have the same symptoms, but they are felt a little differently. Now, with those symptoms, when you're feeling these symptoms and the grieving process, this was in one of the past trainings that we did, this little spectrum here, that when you're thriving, you got this. When you're striving, something isn't right, but you're just getting along, you're getting through it with whatever coping skills. Struggling, I can't keep this up for very long, ready to just toss in the towel. And that crisis is I can't survive. So when we're feeling these grieving process, where are you on that spectrum there? And just to give that self-assessment. This comes from that book, the Grief Handbook, and they're called STIRBs, short-term energy relievers. And when these behaviors are occurring, either your food you're not eating or you're overeating. Now, when we're grieving and we eat, maybe in the beginning you don't feel like eating and something, but if you have those feelings and that sadness and those triggers, food might be comfort. What did we learn when we lost our dog? Have a cookie. It'll be okay. Have a cookie. And we associate the pain of loss and grief to eating. So somebody might just eat their feelings away. Alcohol or tobacco increases. So when I'm in my pain, I drink alcohol and the pain goes away miraculously, but for that short term. So these things give you these little energy boosters, and they make us feel better, and they get us through those hard times. Even anger. One of the widows I know, the anger is just unrelenting. It's been 2 years so far. And the person, I don't know if it's, because she's new in my life. I haven't known her very, very long. So I don't know if this is really her personality kind of thing, or if it's grief and that I should stick around. So is it, she have anger issues, or should I just say it's grief and know that that could heal and we could have a wonderful relationship? So that anger is a really coping skill. So if I feel pain, I'm just going to blow up over everybody, and then I know they're going to step back. over exercising, just watching movies all day long. So all of these are good. They're kind of coping skills, but they're short term and they're not going to help your grief. They're not going to help the process to complete your grief. We all do a little bit of all of these just to deal with the days, to deal with our sadness, our pain, just to detach from the day a little bit and just relax. So when should I seek professional support? Well, those short-term energy boosters there, how are you coping? Are you coping in healthy ways, or are you using a lot of these behaviors? So how are you coping with this grief? And then when to be concerned. So if it is disrupting your ability to work or attend school, to carry out daily activities, to engage in satisfying relationships, what is the severity and duration of what's going on? And once you kind of look, am I depressed or is it grief? Identify these reactions and these behaviors, kind of process it. How is it affecting my ability to, continue and move on and not get stuck? But whether it's depression or grief, we still need to reach out and get some support. If it's depression, we do need to go to a mental health professional. If it's grief, we do need to go to, support groups, read some grief handbooks. We have to find a way to get through this process. So ways to provide support, acknowledge that situation, just, connecting with them empathically, that genuine concern, reflect their emotions. This is really hard for you, man. I can't imagine what you're going through. Wow, this is a lot. This is a lot to handle, man. Just reflect and empathically connect. Offer to help them with everyday tasks. But remember that story I talked about, the cutting the grass. Like if you're going shopping, just call them up. Hey, I'm going to Kroger's. I'm going to pick you up a few things. Or you ask, what do you need? What are they going to answer?
Nothing.
Nothing. No, I'm fine. Nothing. So just say, hey, I'm going to Kroger's. I'm going to get you some milk and bread and butter and cheese, all the staples, some eggs. Just do it. Bring it to them. But let them know you're doing that. Encourage them to take healthy choices. So let's go out for a walk. Are you sleeping well? So have that conversation. I'm really concerned. I want to make sure, you're getting sleep. How are you sleeping? Let's go for a walk. I'm going to bring you over some meals. The one thing about meals, my sister just lost her husband last year. And what do people bring everybody at the funeral? Everything. It's just food, food, food. My sister lives alone now. Well, she has one child left, I should say. And people are bringing these big old platters of sandwiches and cookies, this big old platter. And she's just like, I am sick of people bringing me food. I'm just sick of food. I mean, everybody, we don't know what to do, right? So we're going to bring them food because we don't want them to stress over meals throughout the week or through the day. And it just went the opposite direction with my sister. She hated when somebody brought her food. I know people who hate flowers now. They hate the smell of flowers. Flowers in the hospital, flowers at the funeral, flowers at home. Every time they turn around, they're just bombarded with flowers. Right or wrong, what do we do? Know that you don't have to have all the answers. It's just sitting there with that, I don't know. What am I going to do now? I don't know. I don't know, honey. And it's not necessary to try to make them feel better. As a matter of fact, don't try to make them feel better. Because really, I don't know. Everybody's different. You might have something that will make them feel better, but you don't have to try to make them feel better. Just be there. You can listen and not say anything. When they asking you, just all you got to do is and shake your head. You don't have to respond to them. Don't take their anger or negative feelings personally. And this is what I'm dealing with. This the widow I'm talking about is like some of the things, some of the catharsis reactions that they have. Some of them are personal and some of them hurt. But it's the grieving process. To take that personally, as that person said that thing to hurt you, no, that person said that thing because they were in pain. We have to give them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of grace. Does anybody want to jump in here on ways to provide support?
I mean, just kind of like what you said, Joe. I think the one that really helps is just being there to listen to them and let them kind of vent and let out the emotions and not make it about yourself. Because sometimes we kind of want to be like, oh, well, when I went through this, just let them say what they need to say and just listen.
Sure. All right, well, let's get to the things that we shouldn't do. Before I start these bullet points, I want to ask, what are things that were said to you that were not helpful, maybe even hurtful, maybe even rude? Go through some things that people say that might not be healthy.
Okay, well, I remember one when I was grieving my brother-in-law from cancer, and my aunt had passed away from breast cancer within days apart. I had this really good friend at the time where she made it about herself. And I'm the type of person, if I'm grieving, I need space to think, try to figure myself out. And I always say, I hope nobody takes it personal, but that's just my way of grieving. But she kind of made it all about herself. Well, I feel neglected. Like, you're not giving me attention. And I'm looking at her like, I'm grieving, and I just couldn't get over that. I still think about it. It's been like years, but it's always in the back of my mind. Like, how do you say that to somebody who's trying to grieve, but then you're making it about yourself? So you're not giving me attention, or you're not talking to me like you used to. Well, I'm trying to grieve here. Like, I had to tell her, give me my space. Like, I feel suffocated. Yeah. So it was.
Doesn't see you. That's what they say. Well,
Yeah.
You don't see me. You don't see me. I'm grieving here. And you're going to say that I should make you feel better?
Yeah. I was kind of taken aback with that one. I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah.
There was one, my sister-in-law passed away and of brain cancer. And I went back into work, and I know everybody has their heart in the right place, but it totally made me melt down when people were like, I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm like, God, I wish you hadn't said that, because then I just was completely a mess after that. I had a hard time pulling myself back together. So and I know that their heart is in the right place. It's a tough situation.
And what did that phrase mean to you? Why was it so unhelpful and hurtful?
Well, because I was at work and now I'm crying.
Okay, all right.
And I feel like I'm not functioning and doing my job. You know what I mean? Had it been on the street or at home, it would have been a different story. But I'm at work and I'm supposed to be professional, and now I'm a mess. So.
Yeah. When I lost my father, I called my workplace. I was 25. I called my workplace. I used to work in the restaurant business. I called them. I said, when I come back to work, tell all the employees there to not ask about my father. I just didn't want to bring it up. Oh, sorry to hear about your dad. And then boom, there goes the waterworks, just like you're explaining, right? So the first time, so I said, just let me come back to work and just continue my day. So, but even though sorry for your loss is almost like the most common thing people say, because we don't know what to say, right? Sorry for your loss. Does that sound empathic? Does that sound, even if it's not a workplace thing that's going to create waterworks? How would that, I mean, it's a nice thing to say.
It does. If you're going through something and someone acknowledges that you are going through something, even though it is something like sorry about your loss, or my condolence to you and your family, it is comforting to know as a person that someone is thinking about you, because people don't have to think about you. They really could treat you like, another day and just move on. So I do think that saying things like that shows, that you are concerned about that individual. And to me, it also opens the doorway. At least let them know that the doorway can be open if you want to go further than this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry for your loss and my condolences. That's pretty common and it's okay, but it's just the way it's said. Sorry for your loss is kind of so objective and so the do's and don'ts are all kind of individual. Like some people, sorry for your loss. Well, thank you very much for thinking of me. I get that.
I think I was going to say one of the things I think that is hard to accept is when someone says they're in a better place. Well, is it a better place than with me or my family or my kids or and again, I think intentions are good and they may be in a better place, but it may be hurtful to the person on the receiving end when they're thinking the best place isn't, or, may take it like, hey, the best place isn't with me or my family or their kids. So I think that's a tough one.
Yeah, that's the third bullet point there. Oh, he's in a better place. No, his place is with his family. What do you mean he's in a better place? Yeah, I know how you feel. I lost my husband too. Really? Do you know how I feel?
Yeah,
you
I
lost
had a really hard time with I know how you feel, because no, you really don't know how I feel right now.
No idea. It's so personal. You have no idea what that relationship was. Maybe there's a lot of contention in the relationship. Maybe there was a lot of pain, and then how my relationship was different to my husband than yours was to your husband.
Yeah, kind of going back to what Melissa said, like when they tell you, I know how you feel, and like how you said, they don't. And I had actually had to tell that to someone who never, and I would told her, God forbid she would even go through something like that, losing a loved one. I'm like, God forbid you do, but I said, until the day you do, and I hope it never is, then you'll fully understand what it's like to have the loss of a loved one leave you. But just to say, I know how you feel. No, everybody's different. Everybody grieves differently than the other person. So they can't speak for you, or tell you how you should feel or so forth.
I try to tell people that I always say, I have no idea what you're going through right now, but I'm here. That's because you're right. I would never presume to think I know what someone else is going through. So yeah, you got to be really careful with that, I think.
I agree. You shoulds. Well, what you need to do is you need to clean out the house. You need to change. Oh boy, you shoulds or you wills or advice. Any advice when somebody is grieving, even if it's good advice, just keep it to yourself. Let them follow their cues. Now, if they're asking you, hey, you lost your husband, how did you get through it? And how did this happen? Follow their cues, but don't give unsolicited advice. Thinking they're fine and waiting for them to approach, well, if they need something, they'll approach me. Don't minimize their reactions or tell them they're lucky it wasn't worse. Well, at least you have 2 other children. What? Really? It's like, you're trying to make them feel better with good intentions, but you really have to filter what's coming out of your mouth and understanding what they're going through. A big one is making the conversation about your reactions. So they're telling you about a loss. Oh, I know I lost. And then you give them, then, okay, now it's about you. And don't press for details about the death. I mean, we all want to know, how did he die? So don't really press for details unless they are giving you cues and they're telling you the story, and then you can just reflect and say, wow, that must be really hard. I can't imagine I love that one. I can't imagine what you're going through. That must be so hard. I don't know what I would do, but you know what? I'm here. So the what now is kind of after the loss, the cleanup work. Like the the bank accounts, the clothes, what do you do next? They have a disposing of clothes plan where they have piles A, B, and C. The A is definitely saved. The B is the kind of okay, kind of sentimental thing that you're going to put in another one. The C is the box that's going to go in the garage or get donated or something. They say every month, then you make another pile, A, B, and C, and you separate the things that you will not part with, the things that you might part with, and then the things you donate. And then every time you go through that process. New accounts like keeping, I know when my grandmother died, I took over her phone service, hardwired phone, get the bill through the mail kind of thing. It was a long time ago. And it had her name on it every time it came. And so I finally called the company and said, hey, I'm taking over this phone, and it was my grandmother's, and it's hard to get her name because that's her phone. I want to leave her name on that phone, but then every time I get the bill and see her name on the phone, so to change those accounts or keep that account and open up another account. I know a widow that 3 years she's been paying for her husband's phone service. She didn't shut off the phone yet. 3 years. She still has that phone. She's paying a lot of money. She doesn't have a lot of money, and she's a single with no kids, and she just can't part with that phone. She keeps on paying the bill. And dealing with anniversary dates, preparing for those anniversaries. What are you going to do? My father died on Christmas evening, and my mother could not be left alone on Christmas. During Christmas Day, we're all together, we have meals and all that stuff, but we all have to pick who is sleeping over that day because mom cannot be alone at that time. So anticipating those anniversaries, how are you going to handle those, the death anniversary, the anniversaries, the birthdays, and things like that. So you need a plan set to deal with those anniversary dates and the coping skill you're going to need to get through that, or the support system that you need around you when those anniversary dates come. So anticipate that planning, holidays, grief triggers, kind of look forward and who's going to be around you. What do you need during those times? Because if you isolate and you sit in when those anniversaries come, man, they are coming like a bulldozer. And then we have to eat. Our physiology, we need to eat and exercise. We need to get outside. We need to see the sun, keep our immune system going. Stress management techniques, reach out. Assertiveness and boundary setting, if anybody is crossing the boundaries or saying something that is not helpful when they're thinking they're helpful. It's almost like we need just to tell them, that's not a helpful thing to say. When I hear that, I feel really hurt and conflicted. So we really need to be assertive enough to keep ourselves safe. Oh, this is that recovery, Grief Recovery Handbook. And I read this because I'm dating a widow. She actually gave it to me. She hasn't read it yet. She can't read it. She won't read it. It's been 3 years and she just can't read it because it's just too hard to read it. It might open up some things she's not ready to open up with. But I saw it at her house. I'm like, I'm taking this and I'm going to read it. And I read it and gave it back to her. And it was amazing. They talk about the completion of grief, as in making a loss chart, making all of these things and connecting to how many losses you had, how you handled them. And it was just an amazing book. If anybody is going through grief, in this book, right when it starts off, it says, you can't read this book to teach somebody else. This book needs to be read for or by the griever. It's a whole workbook, 5 meetings that you need to have with yourself and one other person. All right, folks, the standard resources, with mental health services, Suicide Hotline. One thing I'd like to say about the Suicide Hotline about grief and depression. If you have these thoughts of death, the grieving person, it's about joining their loved ones more likely. But the depressed person, it's about feelings of worthlessness and escaping the pain of depression. So to identify, is this grief or is this depression? If it's depression, you want to end your life because of the pain. If it's grief, you want to join your loved one. Any last comments, interest, shares? Well, thank you all for joining. I hope it was some helpful insights and reflections on either what you're going through or how you can support somebody grieving in your life.
Thank you guys for joining. We will see you all next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we will be dealing with conflict resolution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody
Thank
have a
you.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Joe, I wanted to ask you a question.
Yes.